Rudy, today is a big day in the Alzheimer's world. You've called it a monumental day. Why do you use that word monumental?
Well, at the scientific level, we've known about the role of amyloid in this disease since, my lab and other labs discovered the first Alzheimer's genes in the 80s and 90s. And all the first genes we found all said amyloid causes the disease.
Mhm.
But every time we did a trial trying to block amyloid, it wouldn't work. And we finally realized that amyloid comes very early and you have to hit the disease very early. And that's exactly what Biogen did. And they got approval today. So today was the first approval in, I don't know, 17, 18 years of a new Alzheimer's drug. And this is the first drug that actually treats the disease and its pathology and its progression rather than the existing drugs that just treat the symptoms. So scientifically, for all of us who've been working on this disease for, I don't know, for 35, 40 years, addressing amyloid, we finally see the first drug that can hit it approved. And so it's extremely exciting scientifically.
So you also said this is exciting because it's going to open the doors to perhaps quicker approval of other drugs who might be in the pipeline.
Yeah. So, the thing is optimally, what we've learned is if you're going to stop amyloid plaques,
Mhm.
they come so early, decades before the disease.
Right.
And that's when you have to hit them. What the amyloid plaques do is they cause these tangles to form in the nerve cells, and the tangles kill the nerve cells. But then that's not enough to give you Alzheimer's. What we've learned is that then as these nerve cells die due to the plaques and tangles, you have to trigger inflammation. Just like in COVID, right? The COVID virus doesn't kill you. It creates what's called cytokine storm, inflammation in your lungs and blood vessels. That's what gets you sick. Same thing in Alzheimer's. That has to happen in the brain. So because we're hitting amyloid, because of this approval, what was most exciting was the FDA language in the announcement, where they said, they didn't really mention the effects on cognition so much as we have shown that amyloid is a great surrogate biomarker. And if we turn it down, we will alter the course of the disease. And they talked in the announcement about more trials using amyloid as a biomarker. And this is exactly what we need to stop this disease, because the more drugs we have approved based on hitting amyloid, we can start to use those early on, optimally before symptoms hit.
So what they also said today is they got approval only if they conducted another trial. So let's just say this was like, okay, you've shown us that it can help people, but in the other trial it didn't. So now in order to get this approval, you have to do it again, right?
Yeah. I mean, they're getting approved for a very small fraction of patients.
Right.
And it's based on the small fraction, the small window of disease, stage of disease that was tested in 2 different trials.
Mild cognitive impairment.
I would even say the mild side of mild cognitive impairment.
So this is good news for people who have mild cognitive impairment.
Yeah.
And this is saying to them, okay, we're going to do another trial. So sign up for the trial, because we're going to have to really double check this again, because it worked one time, it didn't work another time. So we're looking for a tiebreaker here. And this is for people at the very beginning of what looks like Alzheimer's. This is not for people who have full-blown Alzheimer's.
Right. Because if you look at brain imaging studies, right, we were wondering why all the amyloid trials kept failing. I mean, there were other, types of immunotherapies, as we call them, like aducanumab, and they failed. And I think there are 2 reasons why this one actually worked. Well, at least it worked in one trial. It didn't work in the other trial, which is why they want the tiebreaker. They'll approve it, but they want a 3rd trial just to see what's up. Well, first we learned from brain imaging studies that amyloid comes in the brain, arrives in the brain 2 decades or more before symptoms. And the amyloid, what's wrong with what the amyloid does is it causes these tangles to form that kill the nerve cells. So for comparison, let's say you're playing football and you get too many concussions, too many bangs to the head. That can cause the tangles too without the amyloid. But think about how long, if a poor player is going to get chronic traumatic encephalopathy or CTE, it takes decades, right? They play in their 20s, unless you're Tom Brady, playing in your 40s. But you don't get, if you're unfortunate enough to get CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy, you don't get it till you're usually your 50s, because it takes decades for these tangles to spread like brush fires.
Right.
And those brush fires have to light forest fires that kill tons of neurons. The forest fires are the neuroinflammation. Well, the amyloid in Alzheimer's is that match that lights the brush fires. And CTE, it's the head banks that light the brush fires. So we know this takes a long time.
So basically, this is good news for getting in early. And that's also kind of changing the narrative for the general public and reminding them that we have to get in early, that they have to get in early, that they have to focus early on, because you won't be symptomatic for decades.
Yeah, look, the FDA was careful not to tout this as something that's going to cure Alzheimer's or turn your, or reverse your dementia. Okay, sorry. What it's saying is that for the first time, the FDA is agreeing that there's enough evidence that amyloid is triggering this disease, and if you hit it early enough, you have a chance to help patients. Now, in the Biogen trials, one failed. The one that did improve cognition was a small effect.
Right.
But the fact that the drug wasn't harmful, the fact that they did get some benefit, the FDA is saying, we're going to approve this. It's the first drug that hits disease progression, hits pathology. But it also, in the language of the announcement, it was so exciting for me because I'm developing 2 other drugs that hit amyloid, but little white pills that are much cheaper and affordable than aducanumab. Aducanumab is going to cost $56,000 per year, and it's covered for free or for a copay if you're in that small window of patients with very mild cognitive impairment, and then you have to have a PET scan to show you have amyloid in your brain. So for patients, we're cautiously optimistic, right? It's a monumental day for science, but for patients.
Let's talk about that a second. You're saying monumental day for science, monumental day for people who are been saying amyloid, right? Monumental day for kind of the biomarker space. But for those who are experiencing, like, maybe I have Alzheimer's, I think I have Alzheimer's, they're like, I want to get this. The floodgates are going to open. Everybody's going to want to get this. And this is really expensive. So in order to get it, you're going to have to go and get a PET scan or a blood test that says you have amyloid, or both.
Probably the PET scan. At least.
So you're going to have to get a PET scan, which isn't covered.
Well, right now, anybody could get a PET scan for amyloid, but you have to pay for it out of your pocket.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, because health insurance says it's not actionable. The positive result is not actionable with a drug. Whether that might change for this small slice of mild patients, they would probably get the PET scan covered.
But right now, if you hear about this drug, you think, I'm feeling like maybe I'm a candidate, you're going to have to go and get a PET scan, which you're going to have to pay for out of pocket, and then you might be eligible for this drug. But other people who are like, I'm getting it and I just want to pay for it,
right,
because it's $50-some thousand and I can afford it,
mm-hmm.
Those floodgates are going to open, and kind of really wealthy people will be able to get this drug. And people who are on the other side of it, disproportionately, perhaps women or women of color, or people who are, economically strapped, will not be able to get it, right?
That's the downside. That's the healthcare disparity that we're probably going to expect with this approval, because, Biogen, we all know that if you want to effectively prevent Alzheimer's disease, you have to hit the amyloid way before symptoms. It's very akin to hitting cholesterol for heart disease, right? With heart disease, you don't wait till you have congestive heart failure and need a bypass, and you say, oh, I know, I'll just take Lipitor. No, you have to take the cholesterol drug 10, 20 years before.
Right. Same
thing with amyloid. That's what we learned. And Biogen said, wait, we would love to tell the FDA, just trust us. If we keep the amyloid down, we'll avoid the disease. But the FDA up till now has required that you improve cognition as well. that's really tough because that's almost like having someone with congestive heart failure needing a bypass and saying, okay, show with this cholesterol drug, this statin, that you can make the heart look better. Well,
But do you think that now because they're saying amyloid, they're pointing a finger at amyloid, now all of a sudden people will be able to go and get a PET scan and have it covered by insurance?
well, that's the thing. People, so there's two categories, right? There's a small fraction of patients with mild cognitive impairment who can have a neuropsych exam and they're in that right stage of Alzheimer's. It's very mild. They get the PET scan, they have enough amyloid in the brain, and check, you get covered to get this drug that's very expensive otherwise. But then you're going to have folks who say, wait a minute, you're telling me that 38 million Americans have amyloid in their brain after 40 years old that puts them at risk for Alzheimer's, just like high cholesterol puts you at risk for heart disease. And if I take this drug, I can bring the amyloid back down and kind of nip the disease in the bud. I want it.
Right.
Well, for most people, it's like tough. You can't get it unless you want to pay this much money. So you're going to have wealthy individuals who will pay $5,000 to get the PET scan out of pocket, find out they have amyloid in their brain and say, I'll pay the $56,000 out of pocket if I can get a physician to prescribe this off label. And it's inevitable. It's not the right way to do it, but it's inevitable. And it's legal. So at that point, as the stories start to come out, you're going to hear you're going to hear a greater divide between the very wealthy who can get this drug that stops their amyloid anyway after they get a brain scan, and those who can't afford it saying, wow, I wish I could get it, but I can't afford it. And I think that's the ugly side of it. And that's why at the scientific level, it's exciting, but
Yeah.
at the social and clinical level, there's going to be a lot to deal with.
So you're saying there's basically going to be a race on for this drug. Anybody who's walking around thinking, uh-oh, I can't remember this, I'm not remembering that, I'm going to get this, I don't care, and they're wealthy enough to do it, they're going to go get it.
Yeah, the scenarios in my mind blow my mind. I mean, you can imagine a desperate family who might want to mortgage their house to get a year of this treatment for their mom or dad. You know, there's going to be all kinds of stories because once you have something like this out there,
Yeah.
you know, and we got to make sure that people know if your mom or dad has Alzheimer's and it's already full blown,
This is
like,
not for you.
like middle stage, this won't work. This won't work. So don't blow your money paying out of pocket. Amyloid is something you have to hit either before symptoms, or you can gamble like Biogen did and said, we'll treat at the earliest possible stage of the disease. And one trial still failed to improve
Okay, so
cognition.
let's
The other
really
one
make
won't.
that very clear because I've been inundated and I know you have, like, my mom or my dad has Alzheimer's. Will this help? No. Will this reverse Alzheimer's? No. Will this, I've got Alzheimer's. Is this for me? No. This is for a very small portion, but large in number, as you just said. 38 million people have amyloid in their 40s. They've never even thought about going to get tested.
Right.
So they're now going to hear this. 38 million people.
Well,
Whoa.
not in their 40s. I mean, it starts in the 40s, but 38
Well,
million.
yeah, but let's just say 40s and 50s before they're symptomatic. People are going to go like, wow, I never wanted to go and get tested because there was nothing for me. Now there might be something for me
Mhm.
that will prevent it for me in my late 60s or 70s. I'm on my way.
Yeah, and for how many people who are going to want it, first of all, a lot of people are going to want it, even though it can't help them because they want it for their mom and dad who's got full-blown Alzheimer's. Remember this, I got to emphasize, the mildest early stage of the disease. In one trial, it failed. In the second trial, it worked a little bit, but it was enough for the FDA to say, we believe stopping amyloid will alter the course of the disease. We're going to open that floodgate because ultimately we want to hit amyloid before symptoms. And by the FDA acknowledging for the first time, thank goodness, that hitting amyloid will alter the course of the disease if you hit it early enough, this will open the door for other drugs. I and others want to now bring in drugs that are much cheaper, more affordable,
Yeah.
small little white pills, not IV antibodies, that are safe and say to the FDA, let us try to move amyloid. Aducanumab definitely moves in both trials. They moved amyloid out, but only in one of them they improved cognition because it's so hard to do it even at that earliest stage of disease.
Yeah.
You want to hit amyloid a decade or more, early detection, early intervention.
And
And
prevention.
the exciting thing is that the FDA opened the doors for us to get that done now. That's what I'm so excited about scientifically.
So monumental day, according to Dr. Rudy Tanzi. The Alzheimer's Association has called it a milestone day. Others are calling it a super exciting but cautiously optimistic day.
I
I'd
welcome it.
say since I've been in this almost 20 years, you've been in it a lot longer, but this is the first time anything has happened since I've been in this space. We also want to reiterate there's also lifestyle changes to make that you can start incorporating into your life at a very early age. But I think this points to, as you said, that it points to hope. It points to many researchers like you, Rudy, that are out there saying, "Okay, let's go now." You've said that there is a biomarker. You've said that this. You've pointed to amyloid. We've got other things in the pipeline, so maybe this will kind of make the process faster. Perhaps it'll get the attention of the president, and perhaps he'll start funneling more funding, and the Congress into NIH will start funding more research into this space. So perhaps it will have a ripple effect that we're not even aware of.
And the hope would be that we get as many different types of drugs, hopefully most of which are affordable.
Yeah.
Where the FDA simply asks us to show they move amyloid out of the brain safely. And then the FDA eventually will say, we can start. Like my daughter who's 13, I'm a late life dad. I expect that when she turns a certain age, like 50, right, or maybe earlier, she'll get a blood test every year. There will be the checkup from the neck up in the future. They won't just ignore the brain. And they'll say, well, look, it's not bad, but amyloid has started in you. And we got this little white pill that's pretty cheap and affordable. And you're going to take this to bring your amyloid down. If we keep your amyloid down, we're going to blow out the match. So you don't get those tangles, the brush fires that never light the forest fires of neuroinflammation that decimate your brain and cause dementia. We're not
like a statin. You're going to
Yes.
get like a statin for heart disease. You're going to
Yes.
get it like type 2 diabetes.
Right.
You're going to get, there's going to be something, but most important, that practitioner that you go and see is going to give you a test, and ideally will have some option to prescribe to you that will keep that match from becoming a forest fire, bottom line.
And let me emphasize, the aducanumab type of treatment, the immunotherapy by intravenous, is the most powerful. So I can imagine that even when we have affordable drugs that keep that amyloid down like a statin, there'll be some people who, for whatever reason, they go to the doc and the doc says, whoa, you're 45, your brain's full of amyloid already. You're on the brink of symptoms. And there, you need to get that amyloid out fast. So you will use aducanumab. You will use an immunotherapy of that type that I call it liposuction for the brain, pull that amyloid out. But then they'll say, and now we're going to put you on a little white pill that maintains that amyloid down, and we're going to check again next year. But for the average person, they'll be checking routinely with their doc in the future. And the doc will say, yeah, your amyloid, your blood test suggests you're making a little bit of amyloid. We're going to start you on this little white pill you take every day, along with your statin to keep your cholesterol down. And in that way, we will end Alzheimer's as an amyloid-induced dementia.
Wow. And there is a blood test now that people can get for amyloid, but can only get it in one place. Is that correct?
Well, there's what's called a CLIA, clinically approved test from a company in St. Louis called C2N, letter C, number 2N. And it's probably going to get FDA approved. And then, I think the future will be, you get the blood test, and that tells you whether you're getting into trouble. But then in the beginning, they'll say, we still want to validate that by brain imaging with a PET scan. And then that will tell you whether you need to start an amyloid drug. But right now, let me be clear, the amyloid drug we have approved today is not approved for use in secondary prevention, meaning secondary prevention is you have amyloid, you don't have dementia, you have no symptoms, we're going to give you this drug to prevent you from getting symptoms. That's ideal. We're not there yet. So the drug we have right now is not yet being used for secondary prevention in the masses, not approved for that. It's not being used for generic full-blown Alzheimer's disease. It's just approved for that tiny window of the earliest stage of the disease with amyloid. But that's still a window we can open up and expand it and get it pushed back for secondary prevention in people who are not symptomatic. And then the FDA with their language today, which made my heart sing when I read their announcement about surrogate biomarkers for amyloid. And we agreed that moving amyloid changes the course of the disease and future trials using these biomarker. I've been waiting for this for decades. And that's what's monumentally exciting today, even more than the approval itself.
Thank you, Rudy Tanzi. That's great. Congratulations to you. You've been
Oh.
waiting and your heart is singing. So I love it. Glad to be with you while your heart's singing.
I have to tell you one other thing. I forgot to tell you. Aducanumab was inspired by a study out of my lab in 2005.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So in 2005, Rob Moyer, who tragically passed away with a glioblastoma a couple of years ago at 58,
Wow.
he and I published a paper where we showed naturally occurring autoantibodies against amyloid. And the more you had of them, the more you were protected from Alzheimer's. So in Switzerland, a company called Neurimmune and my good friend Roger Nietzsche read our paper and said, so Rudy, you discovered naturally occurring immunotherapy, natural autoantibodies that just are naturally in human blood that protect you. Are you going to try to purify them, and see what they, and I said, no, I said, we found them, we described them. He said, well, I have a company, I'm going to try to find them. So he took super agers. These are people who were very old without Alzheimer's. I think they were mostly female. And he took their blood and he took their B cells, what's called memory B cells, and then he tried to find the naturally occurring autoantibodies against amyloid that protect you, that protected these people from getting Alzheimer's disease. He found them, he chose one, and then reverse translated that into what is now aducanumab that got approved today. And what's very nice about Roger Nietzsche is who discovered this is when he gives his talk on how he discovered aducanumab. First slide he shows is our paper, and he quotes my colleague and I, Rob Moyer, where we said, here are naturally occurring autoantibodies to amyloid to protect you. Let's mimic those as a therapy, and now it's approved today.
Bravo. Well, congratulations.
Yeah.
Bravo. I knew you had your hand in there.
Well,
As
like
I
they
always
say, success has many fathers, right? So I was hesitant to say it, but it's the fact.
As I said when I was interviewing you earlier, whenever I have a question in the Alzheimer's space, I call Rudy. And so we called Rudy today to bring us up to date, and because there's a lot of confusion around this story, excitement and confusion. But thank you for laying it out so clearly, Rudy, and congratulations.
Thank you, and thank you for making everything I've told you scientifically so understandable and palatable to your listeners, and for all you do for Alzheimer's. It's just amazing, Maria.
Thank you, Rudy. God bless you. Thank you. Thanks so much.